I am a photographer. I'm considered an extreme photographer because I do crazy stuff, but I was late to it.
Excuse me, is there a microphone there, or could you talk a little bit louder?
Do you need me to speak louder?
Stand you up with the mic.
Then we can. I'm dangerous with a mic because then I start doing like lounge lizard stuff.
That's okay.
And I want to say that I threw my back out on Thursday, and today's the first day that I'm standing. So if I get a little poetic or weird, it's the drum.
Are you comfortable holding this? Or?
Yeah, that's fine. I think it'd be weird if I had a mic stand. I feel like
I don't think so.
Jim Morrison just Okay, is that better?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I was saying I'm considered an extreme photographer because. Ooh, what's that?
That is the connector going weird.
Going weird.
Sorry, the expression is the best I could.
Technical.
Yeah.
Jargon. I'm originally from New York. I've lived in California for 24 years, so now I've lived here longer than I have in New York. I won a National Geographic Award in 2006, and that sort of changed my life. I've done work for a lot of major magazines, including Time and lots of foreign magazines. I've had exhibitions all over the world, and but that's not what I want to talk to you about. This morning, literally, really, I woke up and I was almost repeating over and over, how much is enough? I just kept thinking, how much is enough? And I was thinking about how easy it is for us as humans to just get caught up in our little gerbil hamster wheel, our local life, and we lose perspective on the bigger picture of not just what it means to be a human on this planet, but why are we even here? Like, what do we want it to mean? It seems like we don't ever take time or make room for those kinds of ideas, and then we get into a lot of difficult situations, and we say, how did we get in this mess? And I was watching a program recently called Wonders of the Universe, and it turns out that our universe is only going to be lit for a certain period of time. The stars exploded into light, and they will shine, and then they will slowly burn out, and the universe will essentially become a cold, dark, silent place. And I think that's amazing that we get to be part of this time of the light and life, because without that, it's not possible. So this is kind of the things that roll around in my head. And they roll around in my head partly because I'm from the Shinnecock Montaukett tribe. I don't know how many of you are familiar with New York and Long Island, but it's a small fishing tribe on the very tip of Long Island in the Hamptons, and we have a small reservation there. I was lucky enough not to grow up on the reservation. The conditions there were not and still aren't great. I remember as a child there was still no running water, even though Calvin Klein had a house that we could see from the reservation. So just gives you an idea, this juxtapose of very wealthy and the indigenous inhabitants next door with nothing. I can trace my family history back to the time when the Dutch first arrived in the 1600s. And I think about what that must have been like. I had the opportunity once to sail from Europe to the Canadian Arctic, and then down the coast of Canada, and then into New York, Long Island Harbor Sound, and then around. and into New York Harbor. And it was so fascinating to see my ancestral land from that viewpoint. I was raised very much as a Shinnecock, and it's like weird poltergeist. And my grandfather took great pains to make sure that I understood that I was related to everything, that everything was alive, that we were not separate from nature. And I didn't realize that this was somehow different from the way other people were raised to perceive the world. When I was a young girl, he would take me into the woods and he would introduce me to each tree. And he would have me literally hold the tree and say, slow your breathing and listen. And you could literally feel the tree moving. And he said to me, he said, this tree is your relative in the same way that I am your relative, and you must respect it. And I did. I didn't know that that was unusual. But one day he caught me pulling, let's just do this for now. When I want to show pictures, I'll hook it up, because that's weird. He caught me pulling the leaves off of a branch. I was just, a kid pulling the leaves off a branch. And my grandfather was very stoic, so he really paid attention when he gave you attention. And he said, you think you're separate, that you can do whatever you want to this tree and there's no consequence? He said, if you think you're separate from nature, see how long you can hold your breath. And these were the kinds of lessons that my grandfather gave me and my brother and my cousins. He would have us sit outside. One of the things I had to do as a child from the age of 5 till he died, 13, every day after school, rain, snow, didn't matter. Had to be out there. It could be 100 degrees and I'd have to be outside. And he would sit me in, I had one area that I really liked, which was on top of a picnic table. And I would sit on top of this picnic table. I was not allowed to move any further than the circumference of my arms. And I had to just observe. And after an hour, he would call me into the house and he would say, Camille, what did you see? And if I was feeling a little rambunctious, I'd say, Grandpa, I didn't see nothing. And he'd say, go back outside. So you learn pretty quickly to just do the hour and watch. And I would watch spiders building webs and butterflies and squirrels and birds and clouds and the trees. And he would interpret these things for me. But more importantly, as a photographer, I realized he gave me an incredible gift of how to be still and observe. And I still have that, I still practice that. And it's amazing how if you start to do it, even just 3 minutes a day, how much it can really change the way you move through this planet, what you become aware of. And one of the other lessons that he gave when I was, I think about 6, is he had a bunch of us sit in the grass on a hot summer day. And there were no clouds in the sky, and it was really like a Long Island hot day, probably 98 to 100 degrees. And he would say, be still. And so we'd sit there and we really just started sweating, no shade at all, and just looking at the sky. And after a while, we really just start dripping sweat, and I'm wondering, why are we doing this? And I look to him, and just as I'm about to say something, he says, look, and he points up to the sky, and there's this little white tuft of cloud that starts to appear, and he says, that's your sweat, that becomes the cloud. Your water becomes the rain, that becomes the snow that feeds the plants, that feeds the animals, that feed you. And always, all of his lessons, whether it was when we were cleaning a fish or then putting that fish head in our garden, was to remind us of how everything was interconnected and that we were part of this connection. All of this sort of got lost for a while. After he died, my family just fell into chaos, and something else was happening at the same time. As a small child, I loved to draw, and for some reason, my mother never gave me any paper. And so they would find me on the underside of the dining room table drawing and they'd find me in my closet in my room drawing. I was like a natural graffiti artist. And one day my aunt, she said, you know, you really should give that girl some paper. And so they got me some paper and I started drawing. And those drawings sort of became my escape as my family life disintegrated. And by the time I was 14, I was so into it, so passionate about it, that same aunt who said, why don't you give her some paper, said, you know, she really should audition for the School of the Arts in New York City. And so I did, and I got in. And this was the Fame High School, if you've ever watched that TV show or movie. And I say Jennifer Aniston was in my class. There are a lot of famous people now who were in my class, went to that school. And I'll just say she always did have good hair. But being at that school was really an incredible gift because it gave me discipline. And we were required to go to visit museums and galleries and even private collections every week. We had to. And so I spent all my time in the Met and the Guggenheim for free, and got really, in fact, I got so close that they used to assign a guard to me in the Met because they were like, she's back. And so I always had a guard with me because I really just wanted to get so close, and I really did want to touch the Rodin sculptures. And I was soaking in all of this visual aesthetic information of these great pieces of art. And then things were really bad at home. My mom is African American and Italian, Roman Catholic, and she went through Catholic school, and she probably should have been a nun, but she was very devout, and I don't think she knew what to do with me. Even from an early age, she just didn't know how to make me fit into her understanding of the world. I was too strange, and it didn't come out well between us. We had a lot of abrasion. And so at 15, I just decided I had to go. I couldn't take this any longer. And I didn't ever really think about it, but I was homeless at 15 in New York City. And I would sleep on my friends' couches and so that I could continue to go to school. And I had several after-school jobs to have money to support myself. My first job was at Woolworths. I don't even know if you guys know what that is. And I lied. I said I was 16 so that I could get the job. And then I was also a New York City bike messenger. And I thought that was a very romantic job, but the realities were really hard. It was a hard job. And then I also worked in a 1-hour photo lab, which was an education in itself. Just imagine New York City, what people bring in. And it's amazing how many people don't filter or censor what they, I guess they think we don't see it. But that was my high school education. But when I left home, the school recognized that I was at risk of dropping out, risk of getting into trouble. And so they put me in this after-school program where they gave me a film camera. It was a Nichromat film camera, but they took away the manual. They said you have to figure out how to use it yourself. And then they said, this is how you bulk load black and white film, and this is how you process and develop it, and here's a wet darkroom for you to use. And then they said, go out and photograph your experience. And I didn't realize it, but that was probably one of the most profoundly positive things anyone could have done for me in that time. Because it gave me something creative and positive in a time when I was very angry and confused. So I photographed my punk rock friends and all of our adventures. It gave me an excuse to be places I had no excuse to be. And I didn't think about it. I never thought, oh, I should do this for a living. I'm going to fast forward a little to age 29. I'm in California. I moved to California when I was 21. And in California, I'm so happy. Every year of my life is a new adventure. But in age 29, I've been doing my traditional beadwork. Moccasins and dolls and all sorts of things with quills and glass beads. And I'm loving it. And I'm doing so well that galleries are selling the work all over the country, and I've got orders lined up. I'm working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And it's like a meditation when you do this. And I thought, this is what I was here to do. And one morning I woke up and my hand felt like it was on fire. I couldn't move it. Because I was doing so much of this action, I developed what was called Decoravenes tendinitis. And I went to the doctor and they said, this is what you have. And you have 3 options. You can rest it, you can take cortisone shots, or you can have surgery. And cortisone shots and surgery, I was like, if I can rest it and get rid of it, I'll try that first. So during my time resting, my then boyfriend said he had to go to LA on a business trip. And why not come along? I didn't even use an obscene word. I said, sure. So we're at Oakland Airport and we're gonna fly to LA. And it's, it's just an hour flight, easy. And they announced, we've oversold our flight. Can anyone wait just 1 hour and take the next flight in exchange for a free round-trip ticket anywhere we fly? And I was like, I don't really need to go to LA, and a free ticket, why not? So we arranged that I would meet my boyfriend, he would fly, I'd catch the next flight. So I gave up my seat, and I had no idea that that would literally change my life. Until that moment, I had no ambition, dream, or desire to go to anywhere cold. And this was Alaska Airlines. And I thought, well, it's Alaska Airlines, free ticket. So I decided to go to a place called Kotzebue. And I chose Kotzebue, Alaska, because it's located on the supposed Bering Land Bridge. And until recently, we really thought that maybe this is how native peoples had came across from Siberia and populated the Americas. Now that's been proven to be not true. But in 1999, I wanted to go check it out for myself. I thought I'd do a sort of reverse commute, see what it felt like to walk across the ice. And I had no real ambition or thought that I could actually reach Russia this way, but I wanted to get some experience of what that felt like to be on the frozen sea. So I did a little research. I knew it would be cold, and I went to the North Face outlet in Berkeley, and I bought a bunch of warm clothes, and I packed them in a bag, and off I went. And I made the mistake of checking the bag with the warm clothes. When we landed in Kotzebue, it was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was just white. There you can distinguish the sky from the land. And there was no big airport. It was just a little Quonset hut. And they pull up a little, ramp that you can walk down to get off the plane. And as I got to the door, I was only wearing a polar fleece sweater and some slip-on shoes. And I got to the door and just breathed in, and something very strange happened. My nostrils froze and my lungs just just this choking sensation. I could feel my nose hairs crystallize. It was 30 below. And I thought, well, I better go get my warm clothes. So I went into the airport, and you know where this is going.
Yeah.
Alaska Airlines is notorious for losing your luggage. And so it didn't come. And I was really like, oh, this is not a good start. So the women who worked at the airport were Inupiat. And they were like, don't worry, sister, we got you. So they outfitted me in traditional sealskin parka, hat, gloves, pants, everything I needed. And they said, when your clothes come, we'll get them to you. I only had the one small bag with my film camera. And so the next day, I didn't have my clothes. I decided I'm going to walk out onto the frozen ice. And I remember it was the most amazing sensation walking down the bank, snow-covered, and then knowing, just as you take a step, that you're standing on frozen water. And it was the most unusual sensation. It wasn't what I thought it would be. As I stepped, it was this squeaky, almost like styrofoam, and everything was covered. And I had goggles on and everything, and I thought, this is my extraterrestrial moment. This is my sort of moonwalk. And so I started walking, and I thought, this is really cool. And every 10 minutes or so, somebody on a snowmobile would come up and they'd be like, you okay? And I'd say, yeah, I'm just going for a walk. And they'd be like, okay. And they'd pull away. And there were little twigs in the ice spaced every 10 feet or so. And I thought, there's even a path. Like, this is totally safe. There's no danger here. So I walked and had the traffic of people saying, are you all right? And this went on for several hours as I walked away from the town. And I should tell you, I had no thing with me, nothing. I had no water, no food, no shelter, just what I was wearing and the camera tucked inside the parka underneath my arm to keep it warm, because film will freeze and crack at minus 35. So I needed to keep it warm. And I did not consider myself a photographer. I just had a camera, and I was going for a walk. And then I walked for a time of almost a whole hour. The twigs had stopped, and there was no traffic. And I was really just in this white area, and I'm walking, and after an hour, 2 snowmobiles pull up. And one is a Russian woman, and the other is an Inupiat man. And they asked me a different question. They said, where are you going? And I said, I'm trying to get to where the ice ends and the sea begins. And in my mind, I really thought it was just like this clean break, like you could stand on the edge of a deck, and that would be the ice, and then beyond it would be the sea. I was so naive and a little stupid about this. And they said to me, well, that's 22 miles away. And I was like, well, I can't walk that far. And they said, well, we're going that way, but we're not coming back. We're going to go ice fishing. And I said, well, they said, we could give you a ride. That's my daughter. And I said, well, I've never been on a snowmobile before. Let me turn this off. So I got on the back with the guy, and off we went. And I had no idea that snowmobiles go over 60 miles an hour. It was fast. We were zing over the ice, and for a while I thought, whoa, this is awesome. And then after several minutes I started to go, whoa, I have to walk this back. I started to do the math, 60 miles an hour times 10 minutes, stop. So they let me off, and it was one of the few times that I took the camera out and I took a picture of them as they took off into the whiteness. And I watched them until they disappeared. And I thought, wow, that's really wild. And then I turned around to look for the town, and it was gone. All around me, in every direction, was just white. And then I freaked out. I realized that nobody in the entire world knew where I was. I was standing on top of the frozen ocean that literally could crack open and I would disappear. I realized that there were polar bears out there. I had nothing, no food, no shelter. If the temperature dropped or there was a whiteout, how would I find my way back? So I decided not to freak out, just turn around right now and follow those snowmobile tracks back before the wind blows them away. As I walked that ice, my grandfather's words and teachings all flooded back to me. And I realized for the first time in a very physical way that I was standing on my rock in space. That I meant nothing in the scale of time and geology, history, that the snow would blow over my dead, cold body, and I meant nothing. But that the fact that I could stand there and even think about this was a miracle. So I went back and I told my then mother-in-law this story. It also turned out that I was 2 weeks pregnant with my daughter as I walked on the ice. So my awakening as a citizen of Earth was also the awakening moment of me as a mother. It was a very interesting time, and I thought that was it. All right, snow, cold, ice, check, done. And I can tell you, I remember I couldn't get warm there. In my hotel room, the heat was on full and I still felt cold. And I thought, I don't ever need to be that cold again. I'm going back to California. And I told her this story about how I met my planet. Something that really became clear as I walked on that ice was the absurdity of us as humans trying to separate ourselves with borders and religion and culture and language. It all just seemed really, really insignificant. And I told my mother-in-law all of this, and she said, well, she had to go check it out for herself. She was almost 70 years old, and she signed on to go on a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker to the geographic North Pole. And she came back and she said she had the same experience of feeling like she understood she was part of this planet. This was her home in the great void that is space. And she wanted to write a book about it. Well, something happened between us going to Svalbard and this time when she went to the geographic North Pole. And that was 9/11. I remember it because I was sitting on my couch in North Berkeley, holding my almost 2-year-old as the second plane hit. And I thought to myself that she would never know those buildings in the way that I had, except for in a photograph or a piece of film. Because I was a bike messenger, I used to deliver packages to the World Trade Center all the time, and I knew that space in a very physical way, very three-dimensional way. And when they fell, I understood the importance of a photograph as a historic document, as proof of existence, much the way we have pictures of our ancestors as proof that they existed. That I didn't realize was part of a switch that was being tripped on. A few months later, I was on my couch again, watching the news, and thinking to myself, they were doing some sort of precision bombing in Afghanistan with this green glowing, TV screen. And I thought, this is so dark and so cynical, and where are the stories about how beautiful life is on this planet? Where's something to counter this? And in that moment, it was like a light switch being flipped on, where I knew that I would use a camera to document my life, to show that there was something beautiful about this planet and our existence. And it wasn't like I was suddenly like, well, I'm going to go document climate change, and then I'm going to go. I had no plan. I only had intention. And intention is incredibly powerful. I have to tell you, I was a very apathetic human being. I thought, as long as I don't hurt anybody, do no damage, then I'll just squeak by and all is well. But the universe had another plan for me. It kind of on that day said, it's time for you to get off the couch and do something. We need you. And I thought, how pathetic that all I know how to do is make pretty pictures. But it's all I had. So I started making pictures. And when we went to Svalbard as a family, because she wanted to write a book and insisted that we all go as a family, I was on mode. I took with me 5 different formats of camera. I had a 4x5, the kind where you have to put the cloth over your head. I had an old Rolleiflex TLR, which is 2 1/4 medium format. I had a 6x7 medium format. I had a panoramic 35mm and a 35mm rangefinder. And I was like, I'm going to photograph the hell out of this. And I was so excited. Something happened when I got to Longyearbyen and we got on this little tiny Norwegian icebreaker called the Polar Star. I fell in love. Like, this was a very different experience from what I had in Alaska. We started out in Longyearbyen in the open sea, and that's at 78 degrees north. The North Pole is at 90. And when we hit 80 degrees north, this was in June of 2003, we encountered drift ice. And I realized how flawed my thinking was in Alaska, because drift ice are just large pieces of broken sea ice, like a puzzle. And I thought, oh my God, we went through that for 60 miles until we finally hit solid pack ice. And it was the most incredible sensation, something so right, yet so wrong. This feeling of this being on this metal ship, pushing through this ice, and when we hit the solid pack ice, it was just like a cartoon. I don't know if you know this, but the way that icebreakers work is they don't hit it with the nose and crack the ice. They actually use the weight of the ship to crack the ice. So that the icebreaker has a rounded hull, and it pushes up onto the ice, and then it breaks it. And we hit this pack ice, and it must have been about 6 feet thick. And first, nothing happened. We couldn't get up on it. So we backed up a 1/4 mile, got some speed, hit it again, nothing. So we back up again, and we go a little bit faster, and hit it again, and finally we go up on it, and just like in a cartoon, Bugs Bunny, you see this little this beautiful crack form, and then this explosion of sea ice, and I was just like, whoa, it was so amazing. And so we were hooked, and my mother-in-law paid for the entire thing. So as a thank you to her for taking us to the Arctic, we decided, well, if this is the Arctic, what's the Antarctic look like? So we took her to Antarctica for Christmas the next year. So my daughter saw her first polar bears in the Arctic when she was 3, and she turned 5 in Antarctica and saw her first penguins. She is going to have an amazing biography. But when I was in Antarctica, something happened. I was so used to, I thought I was going to be a people photographer. I thought I was going to photograph cultures and civilization. And when I got to Antarctica, there were no people. And I thought, what am I going to photograph? And I decided, in alignment with everything that my grandfather had taught me, that I would photograph everything as if I were making a portrait of it. So whether it was a penguin, a polar bear, an iceberg, or a hut, or a beach, I would photograph it with the intention of showing its personality. And I didn't realize that intention is so powerful that people saw my iceberg pictures and it resonated differently. I was not the first person in the world to make iceberg pictures. Let's show some pictures.
May I have your adapter that you got? Because I think there's an adapter that we can use these and all.
We have an unreliable adapter.
Yes.
Can't have that. Okay, so that's there. So, again, all of this was happening because I gave up my seat on an oversold flight, resting my hand. And I have to tell you, I was very depressed when I couldn't do my beadwork. I thought, why is this happening to me? I thought this was what I was meant to do. And it's coming. So those pictures that I made in 2004/2005 of Antarctica were given to a National Geographic editor without my knowing. Someone was like, you have to see this woman's work. And they handed it to them, and National Geographic award, they gave me an award. They were like, that you're doing this on your own without being sent to do it is remarkable, and we want to encourage that. So it was some money. Ooh, that looks weird. Can
Probably
we-
a bit stretched.
Yeah.
We fix the resolution.
Okay. Stretchy iceberg. The money was nice, but more important, it was their stamp of approval. And that got me on a Russian expedition to the far side of Antarctica. And there was an expedition photographer on that ship. His name was Pavel Chinikov. And Pavel was this really sweet guy, and he was just as passionate and keen about photography as I was. And after each day of being outside, photographing amazing things, we'd compare notes, and then he'd start saying, well, how do you do this, and how do I get that? And I loved teaching, so I was like, this is how you do that. At the end of the expedition, he said, you really should have this job. And he gave me the card to the company. And I was hired as the expedition photographer on ships in both the Arctic and Antarctic. So I was getting paid to be there for months at a time to do what I loved. Can't get any better than that. All right, so this was actually Christmas Day, 2006, on that Russian expedition. And I was feeling a little bit guilty about leaving my daughter. I was going to be gone over a month on this expedition and miss Christmas, miss her birthday. And I thought, maybe I shouldn't go. And she said to me before I left, she was like, Mom, you have to go. Because if you stay here, you're going to make us miserable. She was like, you have to do what makes you happy. And there's so much wisdom in my child. I appreciate her very much. She was right.
How old was she at the time?
Now she's 15, but remember, at that time she was 6.
Mm-hmm.
They know. They know better than we do. So I started photographing. This is the stern of that Russian icebreaker, and whoops, it's going. I guess it's on a timer. How do I stop it? Oh, there you go. Automatically get rid of that one. On click. Awesome. And then go back to that one. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so in this picture, this is Dr. John Palmer. He's actually a medical physician from Australia who, for fun, gets hired to be the doctor on expeditions.
So is the
Just
full
hit the-
screen
Just
to play on?
let's try one more time. What was really cool is we had, because it was a proper icebreaker, we had 2 Russian helicopters. And so this is the helideck, and these we've been watching. What you can't tell in this image is that the swell was very strong, very powerful. Lots of up and down undulation, and those 2 icebergs were going to collide. So we got in the helicopters and we're flying out to actually witness the collision from the air. And so he's on duty as control helicopter guy. And the helicopter is so small that you can't even see it compared to those icebergs in the distance. But that's what was going on there. Another thing that's really interesting about this image is you can see this yellow and green at the edge of the ice, and that's actually algae. And sea ice is so incredibly important for the whole life of the sea, because sea ice acts as like a natural greenhouse for algae, and then phytoplankton bloom, and then the krill come, and then the marine mammals come, and the fish come. When you lose that sea ice, you lose that main ability to create all that phytoplankton. I'm really lucky. I get a lot of overcast conditions when I'm around. I bring the clouds. And so when you have cloud cover, you get really extraordinary expressions of light with these icebergs, and they show things that they just don't show when it's bright blue sky and sunny. This iceberg is special to me personally because I saw it. This is in East Greenland. And I saw it off in the distance, and I was waiting on the bow of the ship, and I was using this very unfriendly German camera. It was all metal, and it took medium format. It took 6 centimeters by 17 centimeter long negative. So that's the actual, it's not cropped, that's the actual negative. And it only got 4 exposures per roll. And then you have to try and get this metal thing apart and reload it. It was really hard. And then factor in the fact that it's freezing out there and you can't operate this with gloves, and I was really struggling. So finally we get to the iceberg and I fire off my 4 exposures, and I don't feel like I got what I wanted, and I'm struggling to reload the camera before we pass it, because let me tell you, captains don't say, hey, you need us to stop? Or you want us to get a little closer? They have a job, and you're not part of it. But this was the first and only time in over a decade of going to the Arctic and Antarctic that a captain did something for me. And he did it without even telling me. He could see me from the bridge struggling. And I actually got a very mild case of frostbite from that day. But I just had to have this picture. And if you can see that sort of disturbance in the water behind the iceberg, that's from when he turned the ship to go around it. He circled around it just for me, and by the time I was ready, this was in front of me. And the first roll that I took wasn't good, but this was the picture. So one day I hope to find Captain Hansen and give him a print of this. And I don't know if you can tell, but there are little tiny birds up there on the iceberg. And those birds are actually about a foot high. That whole iceberg is probably almost 100 feet out of the water. I liked looking for things like this where you could see some of the history of the iceberg, where these dark blue lines are where melt channels formed in it when it was part of a glacier, and water flowed freely and then would suddenly freeze. This is in Antarctica, and there were patrolling orcas just off camera. I couldn't quite fit them all into the thing. And this, I'm sure these Adelie penguins were having a conversation saying, look man, I went first the last time, you go first this time. I just can't do it today. And I like to think that's what they were saying. But also to have this sort of, behemoth iceberg looming in the distance was pretty awesome too. I don't know if you know this about icebergs, but the blue is the same thing that happens with our sky. It's a refraction thing, and what causes it is, you can tell here in this front part of the iceberg, there's more air in the ice. And when there's more air in the ice, it looks white, because the light is getting interrupted by all these air bubbles. But where the ice has been compressed so much through time or just pressure, and squeezed out those air bubbles, it's just solid water. And when you have solid water, just like our sky, you get that refraction where the rays of blue are reflected. This is actually the cover of my book called Melting Away. And I happened upon it. I only made one exposure of it, and I thought it looked like a whale breaching, sort of. So one of the things that's amazing about both the Arctic and Antarctic is this quality of light where things seem very monochromatic. It feels very black and white. But where there's color, it's really intense. It can be subtle, and you get these really subtle pale yellows, or it can go intensely turquoise. These are called Bergy bits. And a Bergy bit that's a technical term, it's a science term, and it's any iceberg that's house-sized or smaller. So, yeah, those are Bergy bits. And it was pretty rare. I spent mostly summers in Antarctica, and their summer is our winter, other hemisphere. And this was in late February, so headed towards their fall. And what was so cool is, because of the curve of the Earth there, you could have a sunset and all of its glory happening on this side, and if you looked over here, the sun was coming up. So you had sunrises and sunsets, and and they lasted for like 3 hours. So it was pretty awesome. This is in Greenland, sort of similar situation where you have these 3-hour long sunsets. I didn't ever experience sunset, sunrise in Greenland, but you did get great colors. And now we jump. So when I first started photographing in the Arctic and Antarctic, I had no idea what climate change was. I had no idea about global warming or anything. But working on these ships with all these scientists, I got a first-hand education. And being there year after year for over 10 years, I got to actually witness with my own eyes not only the change, but just how rapid the change was. And not until 2007, when the UN announced that climate change was real, did my phone start ringing, and my photographic career took off. That's not really what I want to spend my time talking to you about, but if you have questions about how my career went, please ask me later. I got a lot of people interviewing me, saying, so what's next? What are you working on now? And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to do only long-term projects. Steve McCurry, who's a National Geographic photographer, famous for the Afghan girl, the girl with the green eyes, he was one of my mentors. And when that switch came on for me to become a photographer, I was like, there's no way I'm going back to school. So I literally just called up photographers whose work I admired, and I wanted to know how they did a certain thing. And he was one of the first people I called, and he was like, well, if you want to know what I do or how it works, you have to come with me to Tibet. So I did, and in Tibet, I fell in love with Tibet, and that's a whole other thing. We can show those pictures some other time. But he taught me how important it is as a photographer to be sensitive to the unique qualities of light. And I think partly that's what helps set my work apart, is that if the light's not good, I'm not going to make the exposure. If it's not interesting, I'm not going to make the exposure. And so all these magazines were like, so what's next? What are you going to work on? And I brought up Steve because he said, you can't fake time. People know when you show a photo essay where you were there for 3 days. And they know when you spent a decade. You can see the difference. You can feel the difference. And I felt like there's no way to honestly tell any places or person's story without giving it adequate time. So I knew I was going to be a long-term photographic photographer. So all these magazines were like, what's next? And I was like, I don't know. I started to freak out. Everybody was like, that work is so outstanding. And it did. It just went right to the top. I had my first ever exhibition in a major museum in Washington, D.C. I never even had shown it in a cafe. And it just went straight to a museum. And then all these galleries started calling me. So I started to think, like, what if I'm a wooden trick pony and that's all I got? What if that's, I have nothing else? And I started to freak myself out. And one day, my daughter, who was then 8 at the time, in 2008, was watching storm chasing on the National Geographic Channel. And I was vacuuming the house while she was watching it, and I was like, what is that light? That's really interesting. But I was really frustrated because they weren't shooting it wide enough, and I was trying to look inside the TV, and she was like, Mom, you should do that. And I was like, yeah, I should. And her dad was like, well, why don't you go Google it? So during a commercial, I went and Googled storm chasing, and it turns out it's this whole world where you pay a meteorologist to take you into these places and chase tornadoes. And I found this one website that really stood out to me, and it was totally nerdy. It had lightning flashes across the screen and thunder noises, and I was like, this is the guy, I want to go with this guy. And I looked, and all of his trips for 2008 were sold out. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. So I sent him an email. I was like, I see you're all sold out, but if anybody cancels, let me know. I'd love to do this. Less than an hour later, he emailed me back and said, could you be here in 3 days? I just had an opening come up. So 3 days after my daughter said, Mom, you should do it, I was doing it. And I was not prepared at all for what storm chasing really was. I mean, it's so intense and profoundly beautiful. It's if you're religious, it's like watching God play. In a place where most people are seeking shelter, you are moving towards this thing. And so you get to see and feel these forces of nature in a way that most people never will or try to avoid. And I realized that it did tie in with my work from the polar regions because I was curious about, well, if the ice of our poles melt, how will that affect our temperate zones and our weather patterns? And sure enough, we do. We have more tornadoes, more severe storms, but I didn't want to show destruction. I wanted to talk about the beauty and the power and the awe of standing in front of something like this. And again, you get these turquoise colors because that's hail being formed in the cloud, just like one of those lottery machines with the balls blowing. The way that these storms work is more moist air is coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, and it's getting a spin put on it from the Gulf, the jet stream, which is a deep trough as it comes out of the Pacific Northwest. And as these two forces meet, if the conditions are right, it will actually start to rotate the entire cloud. And then it's called a mesocyclone, a rotating cloud. Only a supercell mesocyclone can produce a tornado, and only 2% of supercells actually do produce tornadoes. So I started to get really into the cloud and not so interested in the tornadoes. The ones that we saw, usually they were messy or not very photogenic, or they were going through someone's town, and I just didn't want to photograph that. So I concentrated on the clouds themselves. These are called mammatus clouds, after mammary. Basically booby clouds. And this was a collapsing storm. A lot of supercells that fail, you have to think of all that energy that gets pushed up into it. These things can grow within a couple hours from 20 feet wide to over 50 miles wide. And they can reach up to 65,000 feet into the atmosphere. So you can imagine how cold things are up there. And the jet stream is what puts a cap on it and helps to accumulate all that energy. So as it's rotating, you have all of this stuff going on in there. But if the warm, moist air gets cut off, or if it just can't hold anymore, it will literally collapse. And as it collapses, it forces out at about 95 to over 100 miles an hour all the dust and wind and stuff that it has in its path. This was one of the few storms. This is not a tornado. This is a rotating cloud. It's a low precipitating. It has no rain, so it's called an LP mesocyclone. We call it a barber pole. And I just happened to get this one over this farm and this silo, and it scares a lot of people that see this picture. But it was one of the most beautiful things because we actually, I stood in this wheat field up to my waist in the wheat, and we let it come over our head. Because it was low precipitation, its chance of producing a tornado was very slim, and we had great visibility so we could move if we had to. This is the inflow band feeding that storm, and you can see it's like waves underwater. Just to give you some sense of scale, there's some power poles over there. And this particular storm was one of the few times when I was storm chasing that I didn't know where to point my camera. I really was just so utterly overwhelmed by it all.
Where was this?
It was in Nebraska, sorry. That's this one. And then this was El Reno, Oklahoma. And some of my compadres were killed in this storm. What's hard to tell is that this whole thing was a tornado. It was 2.6 miles wide. And it was a multiple vortice tornado, which meant that little shafts, which much higher wind speed, would strike down, and you had no way of knowing if your car or you were going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. What saved us, my team, is we were going down the road towards the storm, and it was rain covered, so you just see rain. You don't know that behind that rain curtain is bad stuff happening. So we're driving down the road, and suddenly a tree and a power line come down in front of us. And it was sort of like the universe saying, "You shall not pass." So in our car, unlike a lot of the shows you see on TV, there was no like, "Oh my God," there was no panic. It was like, "Oh, wow, that's not good. Maybe we should consider this ending right now and look for an exit." All in agreement? Yes. Okay. That was it. No drama, no hysteria, just common sense and saying, the signs are saying, don't go in there. We didn't know till later that our friends had been killed.
They were ahead of you?
They were ahead of us by about a mile. And then this is in Colorado. One of the great things about chasing in Colorado is you get this incredible flat, and you realize just how much sky there is, all that white is hail, just hail falling. And this was near Crawford, Texas. I was like, oh, I wonder if that's hitting Mr. Bush's house. But you get to see these things, and when you're standing there, it's very tactile. There's smells, there's colors, there's lightning, there's the wind. And you know that smell just before it rains, that electric smell. So awesome. And I don't know how it's possible that it illuminates like this, but it does. Unfortunately, I'm hooked. I say always at the end to all my relations, because we are all related, and I hope that you felt a little bit of that. And I don't know how much time we have, but I'd love to just answer some of your questions. Do we have time?
Sure, yeah.
Does anybody have
If
questions?
there are any questions.
If you want, I also have a video of what it's like chasing from the car view. It's short, but let's see that. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, okay.
You go storm chasing a lot then?
I go every year, although I decided not to go this year. Oh, this is not what I wanted to show you. Although this is pretty soon. This was all with my iPhone. I'll let you see this. Oops. I think this particular video is really fascinated by the lightning. So this, you've all experienced thunder clouds going up. Those are some of my fellow chasers. I stopped going to the Arctic and Antarctic in 2011 because I had seen too much and I didn't feel like anyone was doing anything different when I came home. I felt like we were still headed towards the cliff and no one was listening. And I was so disheartened and depressed that I was just like, what's the point? And I said to my daughter, who was 11 at the time, I said, just promise me you won't have any kids and we'll just have a good life and F you to everybody in the whole world. And my daughter said, Mom, I'm 11, I can't tell you if I'll have kids or not. And she said, besides, you have to try. So, I tried. I regrouped and I became a TED fellow. Do you know about TED Talks? And they gave me a global stage to speak on. They gave me skills. And then I became a Stanford Knight Fellow and learned more skills. And got my book out and still talk. I tell people, if you love one thing on this planet, work towards saving that. Whether it's a butterfly species or tigers or bumblebees. Do what you can for one thing and it will make a difference. That's not what I wanted to show you. Let's see if I have it. Okay. How do you make it full screen? Oh, there we go. Ready? So again, mostly with my iPhone. It's very difficult to do both video and still photography. They're very different disciplines. But more and more I have been trying to get some. So when we're chasing, we have this laptop. And this laptop is connected to live Wi-Fi. And here we have this Doppler. It's real-time Doppler overlaid on a GPS map, so we can see exactly what the storm is doing, how big it is, and where to position ourselves and how to get there. So this is, you saw the still from this same storm. And you can see like so much rotation in different areas in here. It was really hard to know where anything would drop down. And this was probably the largest tornado that I could photograph that freaked me out. It was an EF4 in Kansas. And I'll move to a different spot so you can see it better. But I thought it was really cool. This is sped up 4 times just so you can see the actual rotation. So here you can see it forming, and there was this small town between us and the storm, and I just kept thinking, almost with my whole body, don't move, like just stay where you are to the storm. I don't know, I can't claim that I had anything to do with it, but it rotated in place for about 10 minutes and then just went back up and left the town untouched. So it was a lucky day for those people. But you can see how tornadoes, I mean that's a big wedge tornado, but it doesn't have very much contrast. So as a photographer, it can be frustrating. But not knowing, and I have such respect for the people that live in these areas. When that siren goes off, it's like something on the back of your neck is just like, oh, here we go. And this was that wheat field with that rotating cloud.
What are you feeling when you're there? Are you feeling exhilarated or frightened?
I think I'm too stupid to be afraid. I'm there. I've even had profound experience where once I was looking up at this rotation, and for a minute I wasn't there anymore, and I was inside a nebula watching stars being born. And as soon as I was like, whoa, then I was back, and I had this correlation that these are the same forces at work, this vortex energy that create everything and destroy. So what do I feel? I feel this profound sense of awe and respect. Really, also I'm humbled that I get to witness it, that I am lucky enough to be in the right spot and observe this phenomena, whether it's an iceberg or a cloud. Okay.
I have a quick question. You were just in Alaska,
I was.
and was that a different experience?
It very much was. Although I did feel, and I was taken a little bit surprised by, so I was just in Alaska in February, and I was part of an artist residency in Denali National Park, and they gave me this beautiful 1924 cabin to stay in. Because it was winter, a lot of the park is closed and I couldn't get very far. And I had flown over Mount McKinley, which is Denali, in the 90s on the way to Kotzebue. And I remember thinking, as we were at like 30,000 feet looking, and they were like, Mount McKinley to your right. And I looked out, and it was like right there, and I was like, oh my God, that's a big mountain. You know, it really has this incredible presence. But when I was in the park, I was told something that really blew me away. Everest in the Himalayas starts at 17,000 feet and goes up to 27,000. So it's 10,000 vertical feet. Denali starts at 2,000 feet and goes up vertical 18,000 something feet. So it's a really difficult, it's just this straight up mountain. And because it is so formidable, Denali itself means the tall one. A lot of times it's shrouded in clouds. And I was really lucky. Almost every day it was just this big thing. And I had a great long lens, and I was able to actually see the wind whipping around the sides of the mountains. And it was beautiful to observe that. I got to see, I guess they call them caribou in North America. In Europe they're called reindeer. But I got to see caribou in the park, and I I think Alaska was interesting because it's American, and most of my access to the Arctic and Antarctic has been European or Canadian in Arctic Canada or Greenland or Iceland. It wasn't American, and it's amazing in Alaska. The road system is awesome. Like you can just drive up to Denali in a couple of hours, and I was like, that's crazy. Like any other latitude to try and do that, there wouldn't be such a great road. I was also really blown away by the communities that I met. The national park people I didn't realize that they are like, they told me, they said they would die to protect that place and keep it as a national park. Like they are that profoundly, like attached to it. They see it as their duty to protect that place and keep it for future generations in a pristine condition. And Denali is a special park because it has a no trail rule. They don't set up trails. They don't want you. You have to literally, if you go in there, you're on your own and there's grizzlies. And they make sure you know how to handle yourself, but they try to keep it as wild as possible in the park. And the communities that I met outside the park, I went to dinner with some of the people that worked in the park but lived on the Stampede, which is where Chris Chandlis, Into the Wild guy, died in the school bus. Out there, they live out there. And they all admit, they say we skipped the 20th century. They have to have their water trucked in, and all of their fuel systems are like, wind or they use these special furnaces that use lumber but heat liquid so that the house is radiant heat. So they have no flush toilets, it's all compostable toilets. And but they have incredible Wi-Fi and really good cell signal. And they were like, that's all we need. And I was like, that's really strange, like to just leapfrogged over. And they're kind of like pioneers out there. Like they're really just into being outside and having their sled dogs, and it's really wild.
So, you did hit that wall where you started to get really sad that your message wasn't getting through.
Yeah.
But did you regroup, and are you still working on that, or?
I don't know what you know, but I'll tell you what I know. And I want you to know this is for real. And it can be really incredibly overwhelming when you swallow it and really appreciate what we have done as a species. So we're at 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we did it! Broke the ceiling of 400, and we're still going, still climbing, burning more fossil fuels. We have altered our climate, not just for, if we went all clean, renewable tomorrow, we have altered our atmosphere, not for 50, 100, 200 years, thousands of years. And we're just now starting to get a glimpse of the erratic weather, the drought, the floods, the craziness that is headed our way. Because we're just starting to dip into the 400s, starting to feel. By the time my daughter is my age, her children will never know the normal that we know. We are basically the last generation to have some sense of normal. And that freaked the hell out of me. But I thought, and this brings me back to that first question, like how much is enough? If we consider ourselves to be intelligent, if we deserve a future on this planet, we have choices to make that can be incredibly beautiful and profound and build we're losing species left and right. I'm sure you saw that the last black rhino died in Africa. It's considered now extinct, just 2 weeks ago. And there's one white male rhino left. This is just a big animal, so we are aware of it. But we're losing literally thousands of species of plants and insects and other animals that we won't ever hear on the news. Our normal is going to become very full of stories. Remember in my grandmother's time there was this thing called a monarch butterfly, you know, or there's so many things that are going to go that way of myth and legend. But we have an opportunity to build something that is better, not just for us as humans, but for the planet, if we are willing to acknowledge the fact that this experiment of industrialization and consumerism is failed. We're not quite willing to let that go. We still think that if we use certain technologies, if we switch to wind and solar, that we can still have the lifestyle that we have. And that's not true. It's just not true. It's there, and if you're wealthy, you may be able to, maintain it longer. But it's time to let go of an idea that didn't work and move, I think personally, this is my personal opinion, move towards something that is more equitable, not just for humans, but for every species. It's already starting in our thinking. For example, they just passed something that said that a gorilla had rights, or an orangutan could defend itself in court, like it deserved equal protection. We're doing the same thing with SeaWorld. We're no longer thinking it's okay that orcas live in a tiny tank. Our minds are slowly starting to shift to understand that other creatures have a right to this place, and an important place for us. And yet at the same time, we still want to hunt and shoot wolves and bears and giraffes. So for every group of people that is pushing towards a better future, there's still a huge amount of people that are clinging to this idea of something that not only can they never achieve, but it was an illusion all along. This idea that we can just take what we want from the earth, rip apart mountains, that it is inexhaustible. And I think that we're finally at a place in our mind, in our psyche, that is making space for true equality. I can't tell you, it frustrates the hell out of me every time I hear a newscaster say a Hispanic person was something, or a black person was, but they never say a white man was. They always will say if it's a person of color, but they will never announce if it was a white person. And it speaks, we don't even have language yet to express what is needed. And so I always, wherever I speak, I encourage you, whatever it is that you do, we need you, and keep doing it. We need you because we need new stories. We need a new mythology, a new ethos. We need new ideas of what can be. And this I don't say to brag, but I had a few meetings with Al Gore. And I said, you fail because you keep bringing everybody down. You keep saying, the CO2 levels are rising and the dolphins are dying, but you don't give a picture of what's possible. And I think that's where, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. was so profoundly effective, is he said, I can see it, and you come with me. We can do this. This is what it looks like. This is how we get there. So in that vein, I see a world that no longer thinks of itself as divided by race. I would like to see race really obliterated. I would like people to express themselves as humans, as brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. We're all connected. We all have a similar ancestor. That's a fact. Beyond that, we all are made of the material of this planet. Every single one of us. And we will all return to the material of this planet unless you decide to be jettisoned into space. That's an option. But really, you have to understand that all of us, every atom of carbon in our body, was once part of an exploded star, a supernova. We wouldn't have silver. We wouldn't have gold. We are literally all beings of light. And I just think it's so crazy that we get caught up, again, like I was saying in the beginning, that little hamster wheel. We get so caught up that we forget to think, what do we want it to mean to be human on this planet? Because right now, what it means is that we are that species who is going to mess everything up. We are basically like some alien invasion to this planet who's going to suck dry all of the minerals and life and then move on to another planet, maybe Mars, maybe beyond our solar system, and do the same thing. Is that how we want to define ourselves? So I think that my personal job as a photographer is to inspire. I'm supposed to show you things in a way that you might not have seen them before, or help you to find a greater sense of compassion or empathy. And if I can't do that, then I've failed. But each one of you can do something like no other person on this planet can. Each one of you has something and is necessary. We need you to be who you are, not who some Dove commercial tells you can be, or some KitchenAid appliance tells you how you should live. And I think when we start to really embrace who we really are and who we really want to be, and let go of all of these, I think, controlling, it's all about control. It's much easier to control you if you are confused about why you're here. But, so my vision of the future is a much more integrated, holistic, where you see a tree and you say, hey brother, how you doing? And you see something made out of a lovely piece of wood and you say, I honor that you are this now and I appreciate it. And I'm going to take care of you because you're not disposable. I believe in speaking to all of the manufacturers about packaging and using the power of your voice as a consumer to say what you will and will not allow. I think it's possible. Grow more food. Touching earth and watching something grow is an incredibly powerful experience. There's so many things you can do. And I'm ranting. Don't get me started. Last question. I have some postcards and some business cards. I mean this. Christina can attest. I love to meet with people and talk, and you never know what could happen. And so you can reach out to me via email, call me, follow me on Facebook or whatever, and get a sense of what's possible. I started something called the Earth Academy because I was like, something has to be done. We have to show people what the future can look like. And right now it exists only on Facebook, where I'm collecting things that people are already doing all over the planet that are much more sustainable, much more creative, and much healthier. And some of it is a little bit controversial. I put stuff in there to make you kind of think a little, is this what you want? But I really would like all of you for homework tonight, So go home and think about, what do you want your time on this planet to have meant?